Is an alert that is not normal in the literal sense that normally we don't see this in America. The president trying to abuse or widen what are traditional executive powers and doing it on a blatantly partisan basis. Take a look at the Democratic-led cities that continuously face the threat or enactment of the deployment of troops. This week begins with the National Guard directed to Portland, Oregon, dealing with what Donald Trump says could be a full-force effort to deal with protests against ICE. Now, the troops are not on the ground. This is a developing story, and the city is pushing back swiftly, suing with the legal argument that Trump would not have the authority to call in the Guard here, that is a state power, and in a related skirmish, one where he already overstepped in California. Portlanders also turning out Sunday to protest this. Clashes escalating meanwhile in Chicago. ICE agents seen in tactical gear walking or sort of marching downtown. Lawmakers, who of course also locally have an obligation to deal with immigration and security, say they viewed this as more of an intimidation show than serious patrols. One ICE official saying agents are making arrests based on looks, something they feel empowered to do. The Democratic governor pushing back.
If federal agents march down busy streets, harassing civilians and demanding their papers, what would we say? I don't think we'd have any trouble calling it what it is: authoritarianism. So let's not pretend it's something else when it happens in our American cities.
The governor trying to summon the way that we as Americans sometimes look abroad with a little more judgment than we might at home. And there is a wider context. The habitual threat and deployment of troops in America when there is not massive unrest, when there are not multi-day riots or blackouts or the type of things that used to justify what was then state-federal coordination, is one sign of this kind of federal power grab. Another is a president making Watergate-level confessions about wanting to indict his enemies, evidence or not, and getting away with it, at least getting the DOJ to start the process. That's what happened last week. And as I've told you in our reporting, you can't separate the efforts to go after Trump's enemies without evidence, like former FBI Director Comey, lawmakers who've already been indicted, and others. You can't separate that from the troop deployment because it's all part of this effort to see how much power he can abuse federally. And if you want to use a partisan lens, we start with the evidence. But if you look at how this is playing, there are even some Republicans and conservatives who agree with the overwhelming legal expert and nonpartisan consensus that the rushed, unusual process to indict Mr. Comey after the president's demands isn't on the level.
I don't think there's a case.
This is not a slam dunk.
I don't see any way in the world that, Comey will be convicted.
Premised on something that's not true.
The indictment itself is quite weak, and that it's unlikely to survive in court.
It's been shot up with Ozempic. That is how lean it is.
This case should be thrown out.
There's a good chance because of, the wholly unconstitutional authoritarian way that this was done, that the case may get tossed out well before trial.
Joining us now is Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. She's the Democratic nominee for governor in the great state of New Jersey. Congresswoman Sherrill, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for having me.
Let me ask if I got any of that the wrong way around in how I described it. I know the National Personnel Records Center and the Chitterelli campaign seem to be saying this was all just a regrettable mistake. I have to ask if there's elements of this that I either didn't just explain or that are different in terms of how you see it.
Sure. So what happened was the Trump administration illegally released my unredacted military personnel records to an ally of the Chitterelli campaign, who then shopped it around to press, even despite being, in his own words, shocked and disgusted when he saw that it contained things like my Social Security number, my parents' addresses, my 80-year-old parents' addresses. So this was not unknown that this was information that should not have been in the public. And if there was any question when they shopped it to the press, the journalist who got it told them this should not be out here. In fact, he wrote a whole article about it and warned them that this was not information. And yet they continued to push this information out and have not given it back, have not ceased using it. So it really, what they're putting out is just not true. And then furthermore, when we look at how this happened, when we worked with the journalist who was presented with this information and went back to the archivist to see how this happened, there's no mistake that was made here. This was intentional. And I'll tell you, if you speak to the professional archivists that were there, remember Trump fired them, and now Marco Rubio is in charge of the archives, not a professional archivist. You'll hear that it takes months, if not over a year, to get access because they're so behind. And yet what happened here was there was a request for my data a day before my primary. And the gentleman from the ally of the Ciattarelli campaign was told, no, you can't have this. You need to meet certain wickets to get it. And then 2 days after the primary that I won, he found, and I quote, a real helpful person at the archives office to get that information to them. Now, here's what should have happened. The archives should have requested a signature of mine. They didn't have it. They should have had my social security number. The way they got that was that a technician in the archives went into the VA database, which they had access to as a federal agency. We would not have access to that, to get my social security number, to then pull my files, which they then gave to this ally of the Ciattarelli campaign. Then they should have told the Navy that they had done so. They never did that. And so there's really no doubt in my mind that this was fully intentional from the Trump administration to the Ciattarelli campaign to attempt to do this. And they've continued now to go after my family, my husband's service, my kids, in a completely inappropriate way. So I just have to say to the New Jersey people, if he's doing this to me, a sitting member of Congress and a veteran, imagine what he'll do with your information.
The last voice talking about the authoritarian framework for this Trump DOJ case is someone who was a Trump defense lawyer. These are not exactly big Trump critics. They're just saying what we know from the evidence, which is that there's no valid case there. We'll cover it. And if more evidence against Comey were to emerge, we'll cover that. But right now, you have this rushed partisan indictment without evidence. When asked whether the DOJ should investigate another former FBI director that Trump hired, he says, I would think they're doing that. Last week, Trump also pushed for the firing in the free market private company Microsoft, who employs someone who's well respected within that company and within government experience, Lisa Monaco. Her crime or sin in Trump's inverted view is that she served in a different party's administration. She was deputy attorney general. That's not all. Trump also demanding investigations of groups that he considers contrary to his own political interests, including a not-for-profit foundation tied with money from George Soros. His executive order literally targets domestic opposition, which he calls the radical left. Jennifer Rubin, longtime writer, Washington Post veteran, warns we are not a functioning democracy bound by the rule of law against those infractions. I'm joined by the New York Times Magazine's Emily Bazelon and Christina Greer, political science professor at Fordham University. Emily, I quote Rubin there because she makes the point that any one of these things would have been a serious scandal. The call to indict people after the DOJ process finds they're not even eligible under probable cause to be pursued anymore in the Comey case is an impeachable offense if the facts don't change based on what we know. And Rubin argues there that these things are being stacked up against each other, and we also have the push for more troops in the streets tonight, Emily.
Right. There are a lot of efforts here to expand executive power, kind of on all fronts. And to go back to the indictment of James Comey, the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, who was a Trump appointee, reviewed the evidence after an investigation of his staff and decided there wasn't enough evidence to charge Comey. And so then you have Comey ordering Pam Bondi, the attorney general, to take action now with lots of exclamation points from Trump. And then you see him install his insurance lawyer as the replacement for the U.S. attorney. And now these charges are being brought. So it's very rare for prosecutors to ever lose a case for what's called vindictive prosecution. But here, what you're seeing is this very public direct line from Trump's desire to take revenge on a perceived enemy to criminal charges that carry a prison sentence.
Yeah. And Professor, I want to play what Andrew Weissman said about this, the strength of the case.
Having looked at what's now the reporting about what is actually the substance of the claim here, it seems unbelievably weak. If James Comey's going to say, I didn't do it, and the only other person who's part of that conversation said he didn't do it, you really have to wonder, where is the proof? And it starts looking like there's a reason that the career prosecutors and the former head of the Eastern District of Virginia were saying that you should not bring this case, because who are they going to rely on?
That's one case. And Professor Greer, then when we put up the many other items, the talk about whether it's autocratic, whether it's potentially the musings of a wannabe dictator, those are words. Up on the screen, we have the facts. This is what's actually being done, and this is in a single week. How important is it, Professor, that people understand that as we look for guardrails?
Yeah, I mean, Ari, the swiftness of what's been happening these past few months, but especially this past month have been.
This doesn't read as a partisan rant. It reflects the exact behavior that Americans condemn in foreign leaders, yet Trump gets a pass on it here at home. Deploying troops into cities without a true emergency? Demanding investigations of political enemies after his own DOJ found no case? Installing loyalists to override career prosecutors? And now, the apparent leaking of private, unredacted government records of a Democratic candidate for governor to her opponent's ally. If another country's leader did this, we would call it what it actually is: authoritarianism. The core pattern is clear. Trump does not simply test the limits of presidential power. He blows past them. In the Comey case, even a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney said there was no evidence to charge, and that should have been the end of it. Instead, Trump pressures his attorney general, replaces the U.S. attorney with a personal lawyer, and greenlights a prosecution so weak that even his own former defense lawyer calls it authoritarian and unlikely to survive in court. What he pushes is not real law enforcement. It's revenge dressed up as justice. And the pattern goes further. The story about Mikey Sherrill's unredacted military records being released to an ally of her opponent shows just how dangerous this playbook has become. Federal agencies hold an enormous amount of sensitive data about all of us. That data is supposed to be safeguarded, not weaponized. When the same administration is already caught using mortgage data, IRS info, and social security files to target immigrants and political foes, then accidentally leaks a candidate's social security number and her parents' home address weeks before an election, the suspicion of deliberate intent is more than reasonable here. The disturbing part is that each one of these acts, the troop deployments, the hit list indictments, the data misuse, all of this individually would be scandals huge enough to dominate the news on its own. Like, imagine Watergate, but nowadays, just another Tuesday. Under Trump, these scandals pile up so quickly that outrage fatigue sets in and we just get used to it. People kind of just tune out. That's like the strategy here. By stacking abuse after abuse after abuse so quickly, he shifts the line of what the public considers acceptable. Suddenly, it becomes just politics when a sitting president behaves like a strongman. That's why voices like Rosie O'Donnell's matter here. She frames it bluntly. No president has the right to strip away the Constitution. No citizen should accept a federal power grab just because it comes wrapped in gold patriotic language. The issue extends beyond left or right, really. It comes down to whether Americans want to live in a country where the government can use their data, use their laws, and even their own military against them. If Trump can do this to a veteran and a sitting member of Congress, consider what he could do to people without that kind of platform.